Everything is wonderful. The market should be soaring. Inflation out of control. Socialists want redistribution and higher rates. The Fed is still pumping until mid-March. Russia's going to invade Ukraine. Biden is overreacting to cover up prior Afghanistan mess. Democrats want to spend trillions more. Fed won't take actions necessary. And the U.S. government is so far in debt it will never recover. No homes or cars to buy. Shortages everywhere. Send it up 10,000 per day. What's the difference? It's all fake. Share buybacks have skyrocketed because interest rates remain low and companies are having a very hard time finding alternative profitable investments. At the price of some of these stocks, it's a huge waste of money. The market would not be at this level if the federal government didn't incur record deficits in the trillions for 2 years straight. The Fed is complicit insofar as they've been enablers of this reckless spending by monetizing all that debt for the government. Their purchases of T-bonds has kept the rates nice and low. The market won't be at these levels if the Fed didn't feed companies by buying their bonds with stimulus. In other words, money created out of thin air. Share buybacks were mostly funded by Fed stimulus, one of the main reasons why the market kept going up throughout the pandemic. You can do the math. $120 billion of stimulus per month times 2 years equals over $2 trillion in stimulus being injected indirectly into the markets. The casinos all around the world are rigged with a simple click of a mouse. I believe we get an event to conveniently place blame for the crash when it occurs. Seeing that printing in theory can go to infinity, I guess there is no limit or timeline for reversal. The only thing that could change that is if ordinary people someday come to look at a US dollar as a filthy rag. Too much money printing. There'll be plenty of freshly printed cash to soak up any market crash. The stock market will go to the moon before the effects of hyperinflation kicks in. More trillions are going to inflate the numbers, regardless of the real value. Low rates will keep the market up. The inflation will be brutal for the average citizen. Only a debt ceiling failure would prevent the melt-up. Collecting crypto capital gains by proper tracking could recycle the stimulus back into the treasury. This is all such a ridiculous fiscal failure. It will blow. Printing cannot go on to infinity. That is the definition of hyperinflation. It's the definition of MMT. The Pied Piper is coming to call all debts due and payable. Government debt to GDP of 54 times and 125 times. And private debt to GDP of 181 times and 235 times. With $330 trillion in global debt, they'll have to pull the plug at some point. The question is when? The globalists cannot afford a rise in populism or nationalism. It would sink their scheme to reset global order. Welcome back to the Atlantis Report. Please like and subscribe. As the U.S. has begun to recover, at least economically, from the pandemic, there's been an upsurge of demand. The U.S. has seen a lot of supply chain pressures, including shortages of parts and materials like semiconductors that go into so many products, including electronics. And also container ships have been blocked at ports, such as Los Angeles and Long Beach. So they're backed up, and that means a shortage. And in some cases, it means retailers feel that they can or must raise prices. When politics are more important than economics, you have inflation. Fuel prices are the most obvious example. This is a tax on everyone making less than $400,000 per year. Thank you, whoever is in charge. If truckers quit their jobs, society would immediately collapse. If politicians quit their jobs, the world would become a better place. We need truckers more than anybody else. The failure of our institutions guarantees that America is a third world country, and not a very good one. The poorly educated millennials will be unable to save themselves, but perhaps a few years of depression will cull them out or change their attitudes. The stock market should crash, and hope it does. It operates in a totally different world from the rest of America. A big, long, and drawn-out crash might bring it back to reality. Anyone who bets against the coming implosion is, of course, not sane. It's just when it is going to happen. The reality is it's going to be fast and furious, and everyone caught up in it is going to lose their wealth. The only decision right now people have to make is, have I made enough to sit out the potential gains of the next X number of months before the implosion? Remember, all those gains can be gone in a day or two if you're not paying attention. The only thing people have to look forward to over the next 2 decades is a dystopian nightmare. The mass boomer die-off really begins over the next 10 years. The majority of boomers will leave nothing in their holdings when they die, and the younger generations do not have the money available to buy up all the property and assets. Millennials think the way you run a business is that you put everyone in a room and say, "Okay, how do we make money?" The medical-industrial complex will make those last few weeks or months for boomers so expensive it will drain any last savings they had. Sorry, millennials. It's not just the Fed propping asset prices up, monetary policy, but also federal government stimulus spending, fiscal policy. Obama's American Recovery and Reinvestment Act, ARA, intended to spark the economy after the Great Recession, and that was over $800 billion. It was considered a massive federal government intervention in the economy at the time. 10 years on, and Trump's CARES Act, intended to spark the economy after the COVID shutdowns, was over $2 trillion. Biden's Build Back Better initiative will be over $3 trillion. How long these types of extremely loose monetary and fiscal policies can continue is the big debate of modern monetary theory. Krugman says forever. I say not forever. He's a Nobel Prize-winning economist, and I'm just a retired trash man. So maybe I'm wrong, but I don't think so. It'll be more like 1930 with the Great Depression, a vaxpression. The Fed accommodation isn't just to keep equity markets afloat, it's keeping the federal government solvent as well. The Fed might have been willing to pull the plug on the markets, but do they dare to kick the chair out from under the federal government itself? Now, we can't predict stock markets, but we can predict what the Fed will do during a Democrat administration. They will continue to pump until a Republican is in office. It has happened every time in 70 years, with only one exception, Jimmy Carter, who was Volcker to Titan. If the Fed pulls the plug on the markets, 401ks and pensions go kablooey. One knock-on effect would be any number of bankrupt states. It is inevitable. What goes up must come down. The question is always, when? Charting and company financials and production mattered when the Fed wasn't printing money like there was no tomorrow. The Fed is the stock market, period. Easy money only works for so long because, like heroin, it is a drug that once mainlined makes the user addicted. This market is addicted to easy, low-interest money. There is no way to predict this crash unless you are one of the lucky few closest to the spigot. And we are not. So many of us will be burned by this in some fashion when the plug is eventually pulled, and it will be pulled when the few are set up to weather the reset. We all know this as the truth, so we must all keep ourselves aware and build skills that will allow us to see the other side. The world markets are 100% rigged, manipulated, controlled fraud. The Fed fraud serves its unnamed owners, shareholders, investors, aka the hierarchy of the so-called elite, to be fully exposed and named at a later date. You can't legally steal, alleged, to own everything if you have to waste too much time in the fraud. Crash and burn it all and buy entire corporations for fractions of cents on the dollar. That's the best and fastest way to steal, alleged, to own everything. This actually happened in the so-called stock markets prior to these so-called stock markets. Those who don't know history are destined to repeat it. George Santayana. Printing fiat as debt to the people is treason. Markets are just another way to run screaming from the dying dollar. The Fed has already sucked any money from savers' bank interest accounts. They are 12 banks that work for themselves, not for us. The Fed owns half of the market value. The game is over. It's print to infinity or crash the Ponzi. There is no doubt they're going to print to infinity. It only makes the rich richer. The system is gonna self-implode, and we are closer. The Fed will eventually just become noise. But before that happens, your rent is going sky high if you rent until you're out on the street and out for blood. Many stocks have already crashed. The major indices are held up by the tech giants. There is no market, just a Fed-managed Ponzi. The market will be just 3 stocks: Amazon, Google, Goldman Sachs. Thank you for watching.